Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Mavic Cabrera Baleza, the founder and chief executive officer of the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders. Welcome to the virtual panel discussion, Young Women Leaders and Peacebuilders on the Frontlines of Crises, organized by the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders and our Young Women Leadership Program, in partnership with the Office of the UN Secretary General's Envoy on Youth, UN Women, Austrian Development Cooperation, Canadian Council of Young Feminists, Global Kids, the permanent missions to the UN of the following member states: Canada, the Dominican Republic, Finland, Norway, and Switzerland. Before I continue my remarks, I would like to request a moment of silence to honor Jacqueline Kanyamanda, a member of the Young Women Leaders for Peace program in the Democratic Republic of Congo, who passed away on July 23rd. Her passing, and those of others who were denied timely and quality health care, bring us deep sorrow and indignance. I also would like to take this moment to be an expression of our solidarity with the Black community and all people of color in the United States and globally, who struggle against racial inequality and injustice. It is also an expression of our grief and solidarity with everyone who lost a loved one due to COVID-19, and those who were affected by the flooding in Bangladesh, India, and Yemen, and the victims and everyone affected by the explosion in Beirut. Let's take a moment of silence. Thank you. Young women around the world lead many important issues that affect our lives and our future. Under our Young Women Leaders for Peace program in Afghanistan, Bangladesh, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Indonesia, Myanmar, the Philippines, South Sudan, and Ukraine, young women facilitate peaceful dialogues in their communities. They are using social media to disseminate peace messages and counter violent extremism and radicalization. They are distributing relief goods and hygiene packs in refugee camps and settlements for internally displaced people who are affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. They are advocating in the United Nations to demand governments to respect international laws on women, peace, and security, and youth, peace, and security, and recognize women's rights to participate in peace building and decision making. In different parts of the world, young women are leading various social movements. They are campaigning against gun violence and the proliferation of arms. They demand an end to sexual and gender-based violence in conflict and in all circumstances. They are fighting for their right to education and health security, and they call for climate justice. In the growing movement against institutional racism, as well as police brutality, young women are also on the forefront. Our objectives in organizing this panel discussion on the occasion of the International Youth Day are to highlight the important contributions of young women on a broad range of issues, discuss the intersection between the women, peace, and security, and youth, peace, and security agendas, particularly on the need to ensure the meaningful participation of young women and women of all ages in all aspects of conflict prevention, resolution, peace building, and sustaining peace. We also aim to bring young women's voices into the UN and other global policy and decision-making arenas, and recognize their leadership and garner support for their work. And finally, we hope to generate recommendations from young women leaders for the forthcoming key UN events, such as the 5th anniversary of the Sustainable Development Goals, the 20th anniversary of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 on Women, Peace, and Security, the 5th anniversary of the Security Council Resolution 2250 on youth, peace, and security, and the Generation Equality Forum. In this panel discussion, we invited young women leaders, policymakers, and male gender equality allies as part of our continuing efforts in facilitating intergenerational dialogues and intersectional movements for social change with young women at the core. As we commemorate International Youth Day, I encourage all of us to redouble our efforts in creating enabling conditions and opportunities in order for young women to participate in building back better and creating a new normal that is egalitarian, just, peaceful, and prosperous. And now, moving on to our program, I am very excited and very honored to introduce a staunch champion of women's equal participation in decision-making. It is my pleasure to introduce the Honorable Karina Gould, Minister of International Development from Canada, who was first appointed as Minister of Democratic Institutions in 2017, which made her the youngest woman to be appointed to cabinet in Canadian history. In her current position as Minister of International Development, she was appointed in 2019. Honorable Karina Gould, welcome. The microphone is yours.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Mavic, and thank you so much to the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders for convening what is this really important event. And I just want to highlight that the work that you've done and the work of GNWP has been instrumental in the recent creation of the Compact on Women, Peace and Security and Humanitarian Action as part of the UN Women's Generation Equality Forum. And we are just so thrilled that this has come into being, and really want to thank you and congratulate you for all of your efforts. I'm also thrilled to be on this panel with the Honorable Lee Andersson, the Minister of Education from Finland, who I'm very much looking forward to discussing with. And I'm also so glad to note that fellow Canadians are part of this event, particularly the Honorable Mary Lou McPhedran, who is an independent senator from Canada, who will be moderating the first session on youth, peace and security, and women and peace and security agendas for sustainable peace and gender equality. I am just thrilled to be part of such an incredible list of speakers for this event, and know that we are going to learn so much from all of you, and I'm excited about the collaboration that will follow. I know it's going to be a very dynamic conversation. So as we know, 2020 was always going to be important. It marks a quarter of a century since the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action were announced, and where Hillary Clinton famously said, "Women's rights are human rights." It marks 2 decades since the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security was passed, 5 years since UN Security Council Resolution 2250 on youth, peace, and security was adopted, and 5 years since the world came together to establish the Sustainable Development Goals. These anniversaries alone would have made 2020 a significant moment to both reflect on the progress that has been made and to chart the path forward to a more equal world. But, as so often happens, events force even the best laid plans to be changed. From our ongoing struggle against COVID-19 to last week's terrible explosion in Beirut, new and unexpected challenges and the massive disruption they cause, they're being presented to moving the equality agenda forward. However, in the face of these challenges, there's an opportunity to effect meaningful change as we work to recover in a more equal, sustainable, and peaceful way. Part of this recovery must be to address the dramatic imbalance of who gets to participate in decision-making. The fact is, we still live in a world where more than 150 countries have laws that discriminate against women, and that the current pandemic has only increased the threats presented to achieving equality as the effect has been disproportionately felt on women and girls. Despite knowing that the best way to eliminate poverty is to create the conditions for women and girls to realize their full potential, we are seeing all too frequent attempts to roll back the progress that has already been made. From Syria to South Sudan, from Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh to challenges closer to home, too many girls have been robbed of their ability to make their own decisions. That is why Canada is so proud to be part of the Generation Equality Forum leadership and co-lead the feminist movements and leadership action coalition. In addition to the leadership teams for the action coalitions, we welcome the recently announced Global Compact on Women, Peace, Security, and Humanitarian Action. We support multiple projects around the world to promote gender equality, projects like the Kenya Women Parliamentary Association, or support to save the children in South Sudan who are engaging with youth to develop gender-responsive livelihood opportunities. In Bangladesh, we support the Global Network for Women Peacebuilders and Young Women for Peace and Leadership program. Through our Women's Voice and Leadership program, we are supporting women's rights organizations right around the world. But despite these efforts, we know that achieving equality will not come quickly nor easily. It will take continued concerted effort alongside organizations like yours to get there. Young women have the power to make a difference. Look at the strength of their voices. My fellow panelists today, activist and community leader Ala Salah's words still resonate from the UN Security Council debate on women, peace, and security. She said, "For the last 30 years, women's bodies and our rights have been policed. Backlash has been swift and violent when patriarchal norms have been challenged. We will be with you to push back. Canada will be there with you along this journey. Thank you for your efforts, and I look forward to learning from you throughout today's discussion."
Thank you very much, Minister Gould, for that very inspiring and motivating speech. And thank you for reassuring, and we never doubted for a minute, but thank you again for reassuring that Canada is with women, young women and women peace activists every step of the way in our struggle for a more peaceful and just society. Before I continue, I just would like to encourage our audience members to post their comments on the chat, comments and questions on the chat box. And I also would like to remind you that full bios of our incredible speakers are also on the chat box. The questions, post them on the Q&A, and the bios are on the chat box. We also encourage you to tweet and post on social media using the hashtag YoungWomenLead. And now it is my honor and pleasure to call on our next speaker, who is a champion of gender equality and equality for all people. And she's also a champion of animal rights. Minister Li Andersson is the Minister of Education from Finland and has been an elected official in Finland since 2012. We may recall the photos of the 5 young women leaders of Finland that we saw on social media in December 2019, led by Prime Minister Sanna Marin. And one of those incredible ministers is Minister Li Andersson. Minister Andersson, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, distinguished colleagues from all around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm also very happy to address this event, which brings together 2 important themes in sustainable peace building, which is the role of women and the role of youth. As we heard from the previous speakers, this year we celebrate some very important anniversaries, as we celebrate the anniversaries of the UN Security Council resolutions on women, youth, peace and security, resolutions 1325 and 2250. Finland's 3rd National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security was published in April 2018. Building on the lessons from previous action plans, our aim is to act even more actively and pragmatically than before, for improving crisis management, combating impunity, supporting women's political and economic empowerment, and improving legal protection in conflict areas and conflict-stricken countries. We're also preparing our first national action plan for youth, peace, and security. The ownership of young people has been taken into account from the beginning of this process. Therefore, young people have been involved not only in producing the content of the action program, but also in designing the whole process. And we are expecting the action plan to be completed by the end of 2020. As part of the implementation of the UN 2250 Agenda on Youth, Finland was also happy to host the first international symposium on the positive role and involvement of young people in peace processes in March last year. Despite the important landmark UN resolutions, the agendas on women and youth, so dear and important to us all, are, as we know, unfortunately facing backlash, and at the moment, especially due to COVID-19. The pandemic has unveiled gaps and inequalities by hitting those harder who are already in vulnerable positions. There is a danger that we will lose decades of global progress, for example, in terms of girls' education. When schools are closed, child marriages, teenage pregnancies, and gender-based violence has a tendency to go up. Vocational education and training is also affected, and many young people, men and women, won't be able to complete studies and enter into the labor market. We have the largest generation of youth in history in the world, 1.8 billion, and already before this crisis, young people were 3 times more likely to be unemployed than adults. If left unhandled, the situation can be dangerous, since the lack of prospect for a better future leaves young people vulnerable to exploitation. Therefore, as countries all around the world are preparing COVID-19 recovery packages, education, training, and science must be placed at the very top of our priorities. We must ensure that our societies become more resilient, leaving no one behind, also in times of a global pandemic, a global crisis. Dear friends, inclusive and equitable quality education is a key cornerstone of the Finnish welfare society. According to our experience, investing in the entire knowledge chain from early childhood to higher education, science innovation is a way to ensure transformation of a whole nation into a welfare society. Countries are only as strong as their human capital. The evidence is also showing the high importance of a child's early years to enhance well-being and learning later in life. Here we've recently amended the legislation on early childhood education and care with the aim to ensure equal access and improve the participation rates. Teachers are highly valued professionals also here. They are used to planning their work independently as well as working in peer groups and share practices. Their skills, flexibility, and creativity were important part of the key factors that made it possible for us to move to distance learning very quickly last spring, in practice just in a couple of days during the exceptional circumstances that the COVID-19 pandemic created. All these elements together pave way to the fact that both young men and women have an equal start in life and equal skills and abilities to advance later in life, including at decision-making level. Dear friends, there has been a lot of attention around the fact that Finland has a female-led government, as we heard also in the beginning of this speech. Currently, we have a record number of women as members of parliament here in Finland, almost half of the MPs. and 11 of the government's 19 ministers are women, including Prime Minister Sanna Marin. On the other hand, nothing is perfect. There are still challenges that has to be addressed. Issues like child and family care duties are not sufficiently shared among men and women. Equality of pay has not yet been achieved, just to mention a few examples. Yet all societal changes are easier to tackle when a solid knowledge base and the right kind of societal atmosphere has been achieved by inclusive and equitable education. Not to mention the crucial role of up-to-date legislation concerning gender equality, youth, and various minority and vulnerable groups in society. In fact, harnessing the potential of every individual is not only the morally right thing to do, but it's also smart policy in terms of well-being and prosperity. Therefore, today it is our duty as decision makers to ensure with determination the continuation of engagement of women and young people in decision making and in political processes. To conclude, education and training provide the best safeguard against exclusion and lack of prospects. Education is not only crucial in terms of gender equality, it is not only a fundamental human right, it's also pivotal for participation, democracy, social cohesion, critical thinking, as well as for making informed choices and evidence-based decisions, which are all also key factors in promoting sustainable development. Thank you very much, and I really look forward to listening to the panel. Thank you.
Mavic, you're muted.
Thank you so much, Minister Andersson, for that very inspiring speech. And I've particularly noted your emphasis on inclusive, equitable, and quality education. It is really the fundamental in our movement for ensuring women's leadership and participation. And I've also noted and very excited to hear about the ongoing process around the National Action Plan on Youth, Peace, and Security. We very much look forward to it. We have asked our young women leaders to have a conversation with our two incredible ministers, and I now would like to call on IC from Indonesia, who would like to pose the first question.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much for letting me to ask my question in this very insightful discussion. My name is Aishi. I'm Young Women Leaders for Peace from Lamongan, Indonesia. So our community currently work with various activities about PVE and CVE, and mainly did women empowerment, both online and offline activities. We had a Peace Goes to School is our main offline agenda to learn with high school students about the importance of having awareness to know about basic reproduction health and also youth and peace, and of course women empowerment. We also held online discussion about UNSCR 1325 by analyzing the implementation of its document from a movie titled Pray the Devil Back to Hell. So my question is for Honorable Mrs. Karina Gould, as Minister of International Development Canada, engage youth in the development and implementation of policies and gender equality and peace building or sustainable peace. such as feminist international assistance policy. Thank you.
Minister Gould, you have the floor.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you so much for your question, and also just thank you so much for your incredible work on the ground I see in Indonesia. It sounds like you really are doing incredible work engaging with young people, engaging with young women. And as someone who is a longstanding champion of youth engagement in politics and policy, but also of sexual and reproductive health and rights, I'm really pleased to hear of the work that you're doing and look forward to hearing more about it. As you mentioned, Canada has a feminist international assistance policy that was launched in 2017, and actually since then we've become the leading donor in gender around the world, with close to 95% of our programming having a gender focus or a gender implication in its programming. And one of the things that is really important for us having a feminist international assistance policy is making sure that we are in all of the work that we are doing, making sure that the voices of young people, the voices of women, and the voices of marginalized individuals are being taken into account so that our programming really truly reflects their needs and is based on their lived experiences and what is most important for them. And so this is the work that we're doing right now in Canada, because as many of you know, I mean, feminism is about creating a more equal world, not just between men and women, but also for LGBTQ2 communities and for other marginalized groups, and really trying to flatten different power hierarchies to make sure that we are empowering people all around the world and in communities around the planet. And so this is something that is really at the heart of what we're doing, and supporting local women's organizations, local youth organizations in the very important work and the struggles that they have for greater justice, greater human rights, and greater equality is really front and center to the work that we're doing. So thank you so much for that question, and thank you for all of the incredible work that you're doing in Indonesia.
Thank you, Minister Gould. I now would like to call on Irina Musi from the Young Women Leader for Peace program in Ukraine. She would like to ask her question to Minister Andersson.
Unfortunately, she doesn't seem to have internet connection, so Natalia Valencia is going to ask that question on her behalf.
Natalia?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Hi, I'm Natalia. I'm from Colombia. I would like to ask Minister Andersson a question. The question follows: what advice do you have for young women aspiring to work in government? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalia, for a very good question. Also, maybe a bit of a difficult one. I would say, firstly, for all young women who are aspiring to work in government, my first advice would be to focus on building up a network around you, a network of good friends or good colleagues, people that you want to work with. Since I don't know anyone who has been an elected member of office who has been able to do it alone. So I would say that our networks, the cooperation that we do, are extremely important. I would also advise you to be patient. A lot of the young elected officials that I know have started to work for their political careers years ago, and have really also put in the work to get where they are. So even though you might not get lucky the first time you try, I definitely encourage you to continue on and continue with your work. Of course, structures do matter in terms of how easy it is for women and for young women to get into office. I also would encourage you to look at, for example, campaign financing laws and structures in your countries. Are they transparent enough? Do they enable for young women to candidate, for example? What kind of support system are there for youth organizations who play an incredibly important role? And last but not least, my most important advice would be to always believe in yourself, because you will always encounter people who might not be willing to give you the floor or to listen to what you have to say. But I think our most important task is to remember to believe in ourselves and not pay too much attention to those who do not want to listen.
Thank you so much, Minister Andersson and Minister Gould, for your very inspiring presentations and for encouraging so many young women around the world to take on leadership position and to work hard and be bold and just focus on their aim to contribute something positive to the world. I now would like to introduce our moderator for the first session, entitled Youth, Peace and Security and Women, Peace and Security Agendas for Sustainable Peace and Gender Equality. Senator Mary Lou McPhedran, who is an independent senator from Canada and is also a founding member of the Global Network of Women's Board of Directors. And the Canadian Council of Young Feminists serves as her Youth Advisory Council. I would like to remind our audience members once again that the bio of Senator McPhedran and those of our other moderators and speakers are on the chat box of your screen. Thank you for joining us, Senator. Over to you for the first session.
Hello, Mavic. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I hear you very well.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you. And thank you so much for that warm welcome. I'm so delighted to be part of this today and so proud of GNWP and my youth advisors that have been working so hard to make this happen. I do want to begin by acknowledging that the Parliament of Canada is situated on the unceded territory of the Algonquian peoples, the First Nations, and that I am an independent senator from the province of Manitoba, which is Treaty 1 territory of the Cree Nation and is also the homeland and the heartland of the Métis Nation in Canada. I'm delighted to be here, to be able to hear Minister Karina Gould from Canada, Minister Lee Andersson from Finland, and also the wonderful questions and comments from our youth leaders that are part of the panel. It's my pleasure to introduce Ambassador Jose Singer, Permanent Mission of the Dominican Republic to the United Nations, and a co-sponsor of our event today. Ambassador Singer, over to you.
Ambassador Singer, you're on mute.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Now it's working, Ambassador. Thank you.
First of all, I thank the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders for the organization of this event. The Dominican Republic is honored to co-sponsor this event along with the Office of the UN Secretary General's Envoy for Youth, UN Women, Austrian Development Corporation, Canadian Council of Young Feminists, and the permanent missions of Norway and Switzerland to the UN. Our appreciation to all young women leaders and peace builders joining here today as panelists and participants. It is a privilege to listen to all of you on the important contribution you are making to peace building and sustaining peace and your recommendation going forward. As this year we commemorate the 20th anniversary of Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security, and the 5th anniversary of Resolution 2250 on youth, peace and security, this event is both timely and vital. The synergies between the two agendas was one of the key aspects we envisioned to address when we introduced Resolution 2535. When the Dominican Republic became a member of the Security Council, we were convinced that in order to strive for sustainable peace, young people were a fundamental part of the equation. Precisely 1 month ago, the Security Council adopted unanimously Resolution 2535, reinforcing the commitment on the implementation of the YPS agenda. Before its introduction, the Dominican Republic and France had already learned a great deal from the young peacebuilders and youth organizations and from the independent study, The Missing Piece, on the potential of young people for advance. We also counted with the first Secretary General's report that presented an overview on advances, pending gaps, and recommendations, and the open debate on the matter held in April under our presidency served as an opportunity to listen from the Security Council and member states on key priorities of this agenda. We built on these and on achievements made by previous resolutions, always aiming at accelerating the strengthening, the implementation of the YPS agenda, while maintaining at its core young people as agents of peace. Resolution 2535 recognizes, encourages, and protects the agency of youth in peace building, civic spaces, humanitarian response, and peace process, and more. One of the particular significances of this resolution is the institutionalization of the YPS agenda in the Security Council, but also in UN headquarters and in the field, precisely in peace operations aimed at solidifying implementation. Resolution 2535 has made other great strides, among which we can mention the strengthening of the human rights framework of young people working on peace and security, as well as the protection of the civic and political space. But one of the main outcomes that serves as a point for discussion today is the recognition in the intersectionality of the YPS agenda with the WPS agenda. Young people are catalyzers of the YPS agenda, and for young women leaders and peace builders around the world, Resolution 2535 speaks to you, with you, and for you. The resolution addresses the specific challenges young women face, including on participation, where they face discrimination, marginalization, and violence, and stipulates that advancing gender equality and women's empowerment is critical for their full and meaningful participation in peace processes. Now is the moment for implementation. We recently adopted it and are still working on the best way forward to ensure this. However, listening to young people, young peace builders, and youth organizations is critical. And in this sense, we pay particular importance to this discussion. You are more aware than anyone about the main challenges that persist for effective implementation and provide key recommendations to address these. Yet, there's a general notion we think applies in this respect, This resolution cements key action-oriented principles that need to be hand in hand with accountability. It fosters capacity building, including designating YPS focal points in the UN system, in countries and regional organizations. It provides guidance to peace operations and requests them to develop a YPS strategy. It also calls on the UN to improve capacity building and technical guidance, integrate the YPS agenda into their planning and activities, and requests member states to develop YPS roadmaps among others. All of these policies, in order to be operationalized, must be developed with the meaningful and full participation of young people, as well defined by the YPS resolution. With the Secretary General biennial report on YPS, with a systematic review on implementation, we are convinced that we will ensure better and regular implementation and with young people at the forefront. In addition, young peace builders and youth representatives must brief the Council, a practice that Dominican Republic has put in place since the beginning, and more spaces should be available for their engagement with Security Council members. This is paramount in advancing operationalization. And to conclude, one last aspect I want to emphasize on, it is fundamental that all of us advocate for partnerships between the YPS and the WPS and the YPS agenda and work towards their complementarity. With a joint approach between decision makers, women, and young people, we can strengthen our efforts toward achieving sustainable peace. I look forward to this discussion, and I thank you very much.
Ambassador Singer, thank you very much. And also thank you to your country, the Dominican Republic, for initiating our newest Security Council resolution on YPS, UNSCR 2535, and it was adopted just last month. Before we proceed with our panelists, I do want to remind everyone on a couple of matters here. One is that I want to invite all participants online today. You can go to the Q&A section and you can list your questions. You can also go to the chat box for more information on our speakers, including bios. And to our panelists, I know that it's a very limited time for everyone, but please don't steal time from the next speaker. Stay to your time, and to help you do that, we have a 30-second reminder that will pop up to help you bring your remarks to a close in a timely manner. I now have the pleasure to introduce our first panelist and to acknowledge that Hila Yoon is the Cora Weiss Fellow for the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders and is also with the Afghan Women Welfare Development Association. And I want to do a shout out on a very personal note to Cora Weiss herself, who is such a wise guide and femtor to so many of us for so long. Hila, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon and good evening. Thank you so much, Senator Marilu, for your kind introduction. International agendas related to peace and security have been mainly centered on armed conflict. However, the constantly changing environment has paved the way for various challenges that requires the attention of the Security Council, UN member state, and peace builders from around the world. The current COVID-19 pandemic is an example. The adoption of Resolution 1325 and 2250 on Women, Peace and Security Agenda and Youth Peace and Security Agenda are both considered landmarks to win, not only for women's movement, but also for peace builders from around the world. This year marks 20th anniversary of UNSCR 1325 and 5th anniversary of 2250, but considerable challenges remain in the implementation and localization of the core pillars of both resolutions, especially in Afghanistan. The Women, Peace and Security Agenda has significant potential to take pragmatic action for long-term sustainable solution to global peace, security challenges, but without localization and recognizing YPS and the contribution of young people in peace building, conflict resolution, and international peace and security, it will not be sustainable. In Afghanistan, women and youth have been seeking peace for decades, and by embracing fresh perspective of youth and women in the current Afghan peace process can bring that long-lasting peace that we have been waiting for. Women and youth have made huge progress in the last 14 to 17 years in Afghanistan. Afghan women make up 28% of the Afghan legislative body, and more than 6,000 women are in the national security forces. And 150,000 Afghan women in rural areas have been elected to serve as communities representative on Community Development Council. Afghan youth are representing Afghanistan at the global level on different international platforms, and these achievements and progress of Afghan women and youth cannot be ignored. However, despite these achievements, we still see weak and not meaningful participation of Afghan women, especially youth, in the current Afghan peace process. But women and youth are demanding their voices to be heard, as the consequences of the Afghan peace process threatens to affect their lives at the most. In order to have true, sustainable, and long-lasting peace, it must be inclusive, broad-based, and reflective on the needs and aspirations of all society, including Afghan women and youth. And this can be only possible when Afghan government and international community prioritize all the pillars of WPS and YPS. While most international frameworks have been developed with good intention, including the Resolution 2535, which calls for comprehensive approaches to peace building and sustaining peace by addressing root causes to the conflict and calling for system-wide protection of youth peace builders and activists, there has been remaining gaps in the implementation of these frameworks at the local level. There has been disconnection between the text, the national action plans, and the implementation of these frameworks at the community level and holding government accountable. It is crucial for the governments and the international community to establish, finance, and constantly support mechanisms that provides the pillar of peace and security. Meaningful engagement that is accessible, consistent, gender inclusive, gender sensitive must be the key in implementing these agendas and action plans. Today, young women and youth are realizing that their meaningful participation and involvement in different socio-political campaigns and peace process will bring positive changes and innovative solutions, which shows that women, especially young women, are no longer the bystanders, but they are demanding for action and accountability. If we want to progress strongly with peace and security issues, we need to break the silos first and recognize the importance and intersectional links between WPS and YPS agendas and the involvement of young women and youth in peace processes and peace building. We must work together and give our full attention to the demands of young people and their meaningful participation in decision making. Thank you so much.
Hila, thank you for your remarks and good to see you on screen. Now, due to very heavy rains in Mindanao, Philippines, we have not been able to make our connection to Azmin Munib in order to join us live today. However, we do have a recording that GNWP will now share with you on behalf of Azmin.
My name is Azmin Munib. I am from Marawi City, Lanao del Sur, Philippines, and it is an opportunity to be part of this event. Sharing some of my experience, I'm also affected by the armed confrontation between Philippine government and pro-ISIS militant, or the Marawi Siege as it is known. Displaced over 100,000 of people, and some of the IDPs still live in temporary shelters, and the city remains destroyed and hopeful for an urgent rehabilitation. So yeah, let us lighten the day. I am a member of GNWP, Young Women Leaders for Peace program in the Philippines. We are a network of young women from across the Philippines, uniting Muslim, Christians, IPs, LGBTQIA to work towards our shared vision for a gender equal, peaceful, and prosperous world. The Philippines is at an important crossroads in its history, with an ongoing peace process between CPPA and PA, National Democratic Front and the government, and the implementation of peace agreement between MILF and the government. For me, the women, peace, and security and the youth peace and security agendas are especially important because they promote young women's meaningful participation in peace processes, peace agreement implementation, conflict resolution, and preventing violent extremism. We all know that after 4 decades of armed conflict, the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, MILF, and the government of the Philippines signed a peace agreement that was later on enshrined into a BUL, or Bangsamoro Organic Law. In January and February 2019, as we all know, that BUL was ratified through plebiscites, which established the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region of Muslim in Mindanao and signaled transition from rebellion to governance. The bill also contains provision that guarantee the meaningful participation of women and other marginalized groups such as Lumad, IPs, and Layus. We as young women leaders for peace significantly contributed to peaceful transition to the Bangsamoro or the barn by responding to this problem. We organized community-focused youth discussion to raise awareness of the components of BUL and why it is important. As a result, over 1,500 young people pledged to vote for peace in the plebiscites and continue to raise awareness among their local communities and encourage young voters to do the same. It is also, we are also aware that the leadership of young women in Mindanao as a champions of peace is essential to transform the narrative of armed conflict into peaceful and effective governance. In the Philippines, young women like me are also at the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic, bridging gaps in the government relief programs to meet the urgent needs of our communities. At the height of the pandemic, the humanitarian needs of women, mothers, and young girls are not being prioritized. In response, we delivered dignity kits and relief good packages to internally displaced mothers in temporary shelters in Marawi City. Our feminist emergency response to the pandemic ensured that the urgent needs of internally displaced women and girls, including access to sexual health and reproductive hygiene products, continue to be met. The WPS and YPS agendas are important advocacy tools for young women. We use them to demand opportunities to meaningfully participate in peace processes, humanitarian actions, and peace agreement implementation because we want a meaningful participation for the tribe people in the Philippines. The agendas also emphasize the importance of integrating provisions on women's rights and human rights, which directly address the gender impacts of conflict in peace agreements and negotiations. But most importantly, the WPS and YPS agendas, particularly the latest resolution 2535, highlight the critical contribution of young women peacebuilders working on the front lines to build sustainable peace and promote gender equality. Lastly, with a community where I almost see a hopeless chance of having peace, I still find a light in faith and hopeful that YPS resolution can leverage meaningful participation of young women, especially in engaging and building partnership with policy actors. And in order to have an equitable opportunity and support towards youth peace building efforts, together, inshallah, we amplify an inclusive and equitable strategies and mechanism to have a more progressive, developed, and peaceful community. We, the youth, have been recognized nowadays as partners for a better and sustainable society. So we we continue to work hand in hand together. We can build a better future and for the coming generation, inshallah.
It was good to hear from Azmeen, even if we weren't able to see her live. Thank you so much. Before we go to our next speaker, who is someone that I had the pleasure to meet and to spend a number of days with in Bangladesh last year with GNWP, I do want to remind everyone to please use your interpretation button and choose your language. English may be your only choice here, because Rimu Sultanas Rimu, who is with the Young Women Leaders for Peace of Bangladesh, will be speaking to us in Bangla. And now if hopefully the connection will work, and we'll go over to you, Rimu. Nice to see you again.
শুভ সকাল, শুভ সন্ধ্যা, শুভরাত্রি। আজকের এই সুন্দর আয়োজনে উপস্থিত সবাইকে জানাই আমার অন্তরের অন্তঃস্থল থেকে শুভেচ্ছা ও অভিনন্দন। বিশেষভাবে ধন্যবাদ জানাই যারা এই সুন্দর অনুষ্ঠানের আয়োজন করেছে। ধন্যবাদ জানাই জনাবা মেরিলিওকে আমাকে পরিচয় করিয়ে দেওয়ার জন্য। আমার নাম রিমা সুলতানা রিমু। আমি বাংলাদেশের কক্সবাজারে বাস করি। আমার বয়স 18 বছর। 2018 সালের অক্টোবর মাসে আমি ইয়াং উইমেন লিডার্স ফর পিস প্রোগ্রামে যোগদান করেছিলাম। 2018 সালের অক্টোবর মাসে ইয়াং উইমেন লিডার্স ফর পিস প্রোগ্রামে যোগদানের আগে আমি ইউএনএসসির 1325 এবং 2250 এবং তাদের গুরুত্ব সম্পর্কে জানতাম না। এই বিষয়ে বিভিন্ন প্রশিক্ষণ পাওয়ার পর আমি বাংলাদেশে নারী শান্তি ও নিরাপত্তা এজেন্ডার গুরুত্ব উপলব্ধি করি। বাংলাদেশ এমন একটি দেশ, যে দেশ চরমপন্থী সহিংসতা, সশস্ত্র সংঘাত, লিঙ্গ এবং যৌন সহিংসতা এবং একটি শরণার্থী সংকটের সাক্ষী হয়েছে। বাংলাদেশে নারী অধিকার ও টেকসই শান্তি গঠনের জন্য ডব্লিউপিএস এবং ওয়াইপিএস এজেন্ডা সমূহ অত্যন্ত গুরুত্বপূর্ণ অ্যাডভোকেসি টুল হিসেবে কাজ করে। আমার সম্প্রদায় কক্সবাজারে 1.3 মিলিয়ন রোহিঙ্গা শরণার্থীর আগমন হয়েছে। এর ফলে যে মানবিক জরুরি অবস্থা তৈরি হয়েছে তা কক্সবাজারের শরণার্থী এবং বাংলাদেশি আয়োজক সম্প্রদায়ের সদস্যদের জীবনে উল্লেখযোগ্য প্রভাব ফেলেছে। আমার মতে কক্সবাজারের শরণার্থী সংকটের প্রতিক্রিয়ায় মানবিক হস্তক্ষেপের নকশা ও বাস্তবায়নে তরুণীদের অর্থবহ অংশগ্রহণের জন্য ডব্লিউপিএস এবং ওয়াইপিএস এজেন্ডা সমূহ অত্যন্ত গুরুত্বপূর্ণ। যদিও বাংলাদেশে এবং শরণার্থী শিবিরের জনসংখ্যায় নারীরাই সংখ্যাগরিষ্ঠ, তবু তাদের চাহিদাকে যথেষ্ট অগ্রাধিকার দেওয়া হয় না। শরণার্থী নারী এবং তরুণীদের জীবন রক্ষাকারী স্বাস্থ্য সেবা, শিক্ষা এবং ট্রমা কাউন্সিলিং প্রয়োজন। কক্সবাজারের আয়োজক সম্প্রদায়ের নারী এবং মেয়েদের বিভিন্ন জরুরি চাহিদা রয়েছে, যা প্রায় সরকার, মানবিক এবং আন্তর্জাতিক সংস্থাসমূহ পূরণ করতে পারে না। আমি আমার সম্প্রদায়ের একজন সক্রিয় সদস্য হিসেবে কক্সবাজারে ডব্লিউপিএস এবং ওয়াইপিএস এজেন্ডা সমূহ বাস্তবায়নে অংশগ্রহণ করা আমার জন্য অত্যন্ত গুরুত্বপূর্ণ বলে মনে করি। আমি নিশ্চিত করতে চাই যে এই দুটি এজেন্ডা সমূহ কক্সবাজারে স্থানীয় নারী এবং মেয়েদের ক্ষমতায়ন করতে গুরুত্বপূর্ণ ভূমিকা পালন করবে। কক্সবাজারে নারী অধিকার ও শান্তি সম্পর্কিত জটিল বিষয়গুলো তুলে ধরার জন্য আমি ইয়াং উইমেন লিডার ফর পিস প্রোগ্রামে যোগদান করেছি। 2018 সালের অক্টোবর মাসে আমি নেতৃত্ব, শান্তি গঠন, অর্থনৈতিক ক্ষমতায়ন, সাক্ষরতা এবং সংখ্যাতত্ত্বের সংখ্যাতত্ত্ব, সামাজিক প্রচার মাধ্যম এবং থিয়েটারের উপর প্রশিক্ষণ গ্রহণ করি। এই প্রশিক্ষণ আমাকে বাংলাদেশে শান্তি ও লিঙ্গ সমতার জন্য লড়াইয়ে নিবেদিত একজন শক্তিশালী নেত্রী হিসেবে গড়ে তুলেছে এবং সাহায্য করেছে। ইয়াং ওমেন লিডার হিসেবে আমরা রোহিঙ্গা শরণার্থী এবং রামু উপজেলার নারী ও মেয়েদের নিয়ে ভালুকালী শরণার্থী শিবিরে লিঙ্গ সংবেদনশীল, বয়স উপযুক্ত, মৌলিক সাক্ষরতা ও সংখ্যাতত্ত্ব ক্লাস পরিচালনা করেছি। আমরা রোহিঙ্গা নারী এবং তরুণীদের জন্য বয়স উপযুক্ত শিক্ষার জরুরি প্রয়োজনে সাড়া দিয়েছি। প্রায় আমাদের ছোট বাচ্চাদের চকলেট এবং তাদের খেলাধুলা দিয়ে ব্যস্ত রাখতে হতো, যাতে আমরা তাদেরকে শান্ত রেখে তাদের মায়েদের সাথে কথা বলতে পারি এবং তাদের শেখাতে পারি। আমরা লিঙ্গ সমতা এবং শান্তি গঠন ও সাক্ষরতা নিয়ে পাঠ পরিকল্পনা তৈরি করেছি। এই ক্লাসগুলো লিঙ্গভিত্তিক সহিংসতা, বাল্যবিবাহ, নিরাপত্তাহীনতা এবং যৌতুক সম্পর্কিত এবং ব্যক্তিগত বিষয় নিয়ে আলোচনা করতে আমাদের জন্য একটি নিরাপদ জায়গা তৈরি করেছে। এর ফলে নিয়মিত বৈষম্যের সম্মুখীন হয় এমন 180 জন রোহিঙ্গা শরণার্থী এবং বাংলাদেশি নারী লিখতে এবং পড়তে শিখেছে। আইনি কাগজপত্রে তাদের নাম লেখা, শরণার্থী শিবিরের মধ্যে গুরুত্বপূর্ণ বিভিন্ন সাইন পড়া, তথ্য বুঝতে পারা এবং তাদের অধিকার রক্ষার জন্য লড়াই করা এবং সেই যোগ্যতা তারা এখন অর্জন করেছে। লিঙ্গ সংবেদনশীল, বয়স উপযুক্ত, মৌলিক সাক্ষরতা এবং সংখ্যাতত্ত্বের এসব ক্লাস সরাসরি কক্সবাজারের রোহিঙ্গা শরণার্থী জনসংখ্যা এবং বাংলাদেশের জনসংখ্যার মধ্যে যে চাপা উত্তেজনা সম্বোধন করে, সেজন্য আমরা দুই সম্প্রদায়ের মধ্যে ইতিবাচক সংলাপ তৈরি করতে কাজ করেছি, যার জন্য আমরা কক্সবাজারের আয়োজক সম্প্রদায়ের রোহিঙ্গা এবং স্থানীয় নারীদের মৌলিক সাক্ষরতা এবং সংখ্যাতত্ত্ব সম্পর্কিত শিক্ষা প্রদান করা শুরু করেছি। কোভিড-19 মহামারীতে চলাফেরার সীমাবদ্ধতার কারণে আমাদের সাক্ষরতা এবং সংখ্যাতত্ত্ব ক্লাস বাধাপ্রাপ্ত হয়েছে, কিন্তু আমরা আশা করি এবং লকডাউন শেষ হয়ে গেলে আমরা আবার ক্লাস শুরু করার পরিকল্পনা করছি। আমরা রোহিঙ্গা ও বাংলাদেশি নারী ও মেয়েদের সাথে যৌথ উদ্যোগে আমাদের নিজস্ব আর্থসামাজিক উদ্যোগ শুরু করার পরিকল্পনা করছি। অর্থনৈতিক ক্ষমতায়ন প্রকল্প আমাদের
Rimu,
Hello?
please, hello, can you please complete your remarks?
Hello?
Can you finish your speech now, please?
Can you give me some time, please?
Your time is finished, Rimu. We need to let the next speaker have a chance to speak with us. So would you like to just say a few words to finish?
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. ধন্যবাদ সবাইকে আমার বক্তব্য গুরুত্ব সহকারে শোনার জন্য।
Thank you. Rima, It's wonderful to see you again on the screen. And I just want to share with everyone a very brief anecdote of how impressive it was to see the leadership of Rimu and the other young women in Cox's Bazar and their dedication for creating a classroom for Rohingya young women, many of whom came with babies in order to come to the class to learn English. The chair of the GNWP board, Bandana Rana, and I were very fortunate to be able to be with GNWP for over a week in Bangladesh and in Cox's Bazar. And I do have to say that Remo was one of the most impressive of the young women leaders. So it's good to have you here today. It's now my great pleasure to introduce our next panelist, Hayat Mirshad, who is the co-founder of Female in Lebanon. And Hayat, it is particularly powerful and meaningful to have you with us today, given what we know about what has happened to the people of Lebanon and how it is heavy on our hearts for what everyone is facing in the country. So please, over to you for your remarks today.
Hayat, you're on mute.
Hayat, we're unable to hear you.
You're hearing me now? It's connection problems. So,
yes,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Senator, for the introduction, and also Global Network of Women Peacebuilders for this opportunity. Good afternoon, all from Beirut. Well, allow me first to start from a moment that we really consider as activists in Lebanon a moment of pride, which is the 17th of October revolution, where thousands of Lebanese poured into the streets of Lebanon to get rid of the country of decades of corruption and mismanagement. And I am proud also that this revolution was also a feminist one against a patriarchal and sectarian regime that practiced discrimination for decades. Where according to estimates from the UN Women, the number of women who were participating in the protests is equal to the number of men, and not only equal, but also women were on the front lines of this revolution. I want to say, I started with the revolution to say that this revolution proved rightful against a system that have brought Lebanon to the brink of economic collapse, one of the worst in our modern history, and an ongoing political and security crisis followed by months of lockdown and struggle because of the COVID-19 global pandemic, all while hosting 1.5 million Syrian and Palestinian refugees, in addition to vulnerable migrant domestic workers. So these accumulations were finally followed by the massive explosion that erupted in Lebanon's capital, Beirut, killing over 160 people and injuring around 6,000 people. Until this day, at the moment I am speaking, there are still people missing, and the number so is not final, damaging homes, businesses, and the already overwhelmed hospitals, destroying the food, the medical supplies, much more, and above all, destroying dreams and hopes for many Lebanese. Amid all this, being a woman, and not only a woman or girl, but also being a refugee, being a migrant domestic worker, being a gender non-conforming person, a minority, or a person with disability in Lebanon, makes you more likely to suffer from different issues, mainly food insecurity, mainly lack of social protection, unemployment, poverty, risk of increased gender-based violence and sexual violence, while suffering to access shelter or adequate services. Also, as in every crisis, currently, the need and demand for mental health and sexual and reproductive health, SRH services, became more acute. So this is a brief context. What I want to say is that when we speak about women and girls post-conflicts, we are speaking, yes, about the most affected, but most importantly, we are speaking about the frontliners also. We are speaking about the peacemakers and response leaders. At every crisis, women lead the recovery work while being excluded from negotiations or later decision-making or political processes. And here I would like to present a recent incident that happened in Lebanon that can give you a clear image on how women are left behind when it comes to taking decisions. So during COVID-19 pandemic and the economic crisis peak times in Lebanon, women were on the front lines. They were the caregivers, they were the doctors, they formed 79.5% of the Lebanese nurses. They were the teacher, the people bearing the burdens of unpaid work, taking care of ill family members, of elderly, the journalists, and much more. While the percentage of domestic violence against women and girls in Lebanon increased by 100%, and of online gender-based violence increased by 180% only at the early months of lockdown, according to official data. Then, when it came to setting emergency plans, priorities, and needs, a committee of 7 men was formed with no women, who, for example, when selecting which goods need to be subsidized to control the inflated prices of basic items in the market, they compiled a list of 300 items, but somehow they failed to include period pads, at a time during which period poverty is prevailing and many women lack the resources to purchase sanitary pads. What they didn't forget, naturally, was men's razors. Also, recently, after the Beirut explosion, women and women-focused CSOs, and they played a significant documented role and contributions to crisis responses. Until this day, they lack access to humanitarian and high-level coordination meetings, decisions, and mechanisms. And here I want to end my speech with main recommendations that we call upon all the actors and all the leaders here in this webinar. First, I want to say that Lebanon's loss after Beirut's blast is estimated to be around 15 billion American dollars, while all the world supported until this day only by $100 billion. So Lebanese people are in a need for more support to ensure their basic human rights. These funds need not to go to the corrupt government, but directly to the people who are in need. And here I want to stress the importance of having at least 50% of all the humanitarian funding for local response efforts to be directed to women-focused CSOs to help maximize their impact. As mentioned, these organizations are frontline responders in every humanitarian response, as service providers, as community leaders, as unwavering advocates, skilled peace builders, and sustainable drivers of progress. So here is a call to make the support more strategic and the human rights focused rather than being a political one. Also, international actors must consult and work collaboratively with CSOs in a participatory approach from the very beginning, from the stage of planning, mapping, etc. Additional outreach and accommodations must be made to ensure that women-focused CSOs in all their diversity, including organizations representing LGBTQIA+ communities, refugees, adolescents, migrant workers, can meaningfully participate in humanitarian decision-making. And finally, we need to make sure to ensure accountability. and to ensure that the support is tied to reforms and the human rights, and that girls and women and marginalized people and communities and gender non-conforming people are at the center of all these humanitarian efforts. And as the immediate humanitarian action transitions to recovery efforts, a gender lens must continue to be a priority in all programs, political, social protection, and economic programs. And finally, here I would like to mention that a number of women-focused CSOs in Lebanon worked along with Women Deliver on issuing a policy paper with recommendations for international donors and stakeholders about how can we ensure that the support that is going to Lebanon is including women's focused CSOs and is feminist. So I invite you all to check online. Thanks a lot.
Hayat, thank you very much for those powerful words and the reminders that were included in your remarks. I would like to now just make sure that all of you are participating today are able to go to the chat, because GNWP is actually posting the names and the coordinates of gender-sensitive NGOs in Lebanon. Remember that it's probably a good idea to take a screenshot of this information, as once the panel is finished, it won't be available to you indefinitely. But please, if you are inclined to give support and to follow through on the advice that we've received from Hayat today about effectiveness, that list is available to you in the chat connected to our program today. And now I'm very honored to be able to introduce our next panelists, Nicole Musimbi, with the Young Women Leaders for Peace in the Democratic Republic of the Congo in the North Kivu region of the DRC. Over to you, Nicole.
Thank you for the incredible welcome, and thank GNWP for having me speak at this key event as Young Women Leader for Peace. In my context, talking about how women peace and security and youth peace and security agenda interlink is recognizing that women peace and security agenda is essential to the implementation of youth peace and security agenda, and that the impact of the youth peace and security agenda depends on the effective participation of young women. So why and how are the women peace and security and youth peace and security agenda important to advocacy for us as grassroots youth peace builders? The YPS and YPS agendas are important to because they offer us the opportunity to harness the capacities we have to participate in the sustainable development that is preconditioned by peace building, especially for young people in developing communities where state impose violence on minority groups, young people, especially from financial disadvantages backgrounds, are excluded from decision-making processes, and where young people are subjected to retrograde tradition, which consider women and young women inferior to men, and are deprived from the decision-making processes. So member states are obliged and must protect all young people through the promotion of youth participation. They must also provide tools to help improve the way in which governments, institutions work with and for us young people, and the way in which the community consider young people. I mean, the very image of the place of women and young women in our community. So today, the world can see the impact of youth representation in decision-making processes through their contribution to peace building and peacekeeping, which for years has been neglected. And yet history shows the very important role that both men and young women have played in peace building and developing through a revolution. In short, today we can we can move beyond seeing youth as victims of perpetrators of violence and recognizing the important and positive contribution of youth to the maintenance and promotion of peace and security, thereby increasing youth representation in decision-making process and improving the way societies and governments and organizations work with youth in conflict-affected countries. I think the new Youth Peace and Security Resolution can be used to hold policymakers accountable to global commitments on peace, justice, and gender equality, because the resolution itself is binding, which means that once adopted, all member states are obliged to respect and implement it and can be held accountable by the Security Council. And yes, it can help accelerate implementation of the Youth Peace and Security agenda in my community, because it calls upon member states to strengthen the participation of young people by empowering them with the skills and resources that are essential for their participation. As young women leaders for peace, we believe that economic empowerment is about empowerment of women in our community, and economically empowered women from a strong wall against violence. As young women leaders for peace, we believe in the strength of women. So women's economical empowerment is directly linked to the conflict prevention and the consolidation of sustainable peace, which is one of the fundamental of a nation development. Investing in women's economical empowerment means addressing the causes of conflict and so preventing and eliminating threat to peace, because an economically empowered woman can take a stand against violence, and she can also participate in the development of her nation by fulfilling her true potential. That is why we invest in the creation of micro businesses. In micro businesses in the provinces of North Kivu. We run our business to help sustain our needs, but also to show other young women that they too can be independent. In a society where women bear the brink of the society status and norms which largely consider them inferior to men, the economic empowerment of women brings about a certain balance in society. So women economic empowerment leads us to have a different view on the capacities and potential that of women which are otherwise seen as lacking. This is a strong message to the community and an inspiration, to the young people who realize through the different models of autonomy of women that they also have capacities to engage and are able to take on leadership roles. Thank you so much.
Nicole, thank you very much. We are now going to move to our next speaker, Marita Sorholm-Rensvik, Norway's Special Envoy for Women, Peace and Security. Marita, it's good to see you on the screen today. We last saw each other at the conference in Vienna, where Austria and the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund and GNWP brought together amazing women grassroots leaders for a conference that was memorable. And because I won't be doing the next panel as moderator, I want to take this moment to thank one of our hosts from Austria who is participating today, Ambassador Desiree Schweitzer, who was one of our co-hosts and is with us to celebrate International Youth Day. Marita, over to you.
Thank you. And thank you, Mavic and the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders for gathering us virtually today. We are so grateful for our long-term partnership, and we applaud the way you continuously raise the role of young women and young peace builders. I also want to thank, more than anything, I want to thank the young women here themselves. It's been fantastic to listen to you. You are leaders and you are enabling peace. On the women, peace and security and youth peace and security agendas, let me just start by saying that I was there in 2015. I heard the concerns of many that attention and resources would now be redirected from women to youth, and that women once again would be marginalized, this time due to the appeal of or the fear of louder young men. And surely we do need to keep a close eye on women and youth as separate groups, or even separate groups of groups deserving of influence and funding, entitled to a peace that reaches them and responds to their needs and priorities. Also, it cannot be ignored that being a woman is usually more of a permanent feature than being young, my kids tell me. The issues for youth and for women are not always the same or even comparable. Yet while the agendas are not identical, and while women, peace and security remains our primary focus, women and youth are natural allies for peace in so many ways. Both tend to be treated as minorities, while in fact often a majority, which means that a critical mass of people, citizens, victims, peace builders and first responders are not heard and their advice not heeded when peace processes are set up, when peace accords are implemented, humanitarian response and peacekeeping arranged. Both women and youth are hard hit by conflict and crisis, and while being forced to pick up the pieces and lead the way very often by circumstance, are striving to gain access to the right arenas and measures in order to actually do so. Also, both have little to lose and are rarely in position or power of privilege. And perhaps for that reason, women and youth tend to speak for their communities and fight for the people that are living the crisis as invested human beings whose life and future depends on the decisions being made. All of this is why women, peace and security has been a Norwegian priority for years, and why we strive to ensure that our work is inclusive in all kinds of ways. Also for different women, not only women in general. And young women play key roles in our work. Bridging the generation gap has to be a key. Mentorship by seasoned women peace builders, women politicians, women leaders in the security sector. It's not about passing knowledge and experience only. It's also about opening doors for younger women, providing access, and sometimes it's about security. Likewise, the young we know might see things we don't, and might work in new ways and with other groups, which is fantastic. Norway has a broad focus on education and health that helps to further young people's rights and improve their opportunity to exert influence also in peace and security. This is in fact our single most important contribution to the youth peace and security agenda. Yet in one peace and security arena, we decided very early to specifically focus on the rights and priorities of youth as well as women, because the initial discussions on the prevention of violent extremism showed very clearly that women and youth are often exposed to such violence, targeted by extremists, great resources that are sometimes recruited to violent groups, and might be exceptionally effective destructive forces. But more than anything, women and youth have proven to be powerful agents of peace, and we would be amiss not to consult or support them. That's why even before the Security Council Resolution 2250 was adopted, Norway supported the establishment of the Women's Alliance for Security Leadership and Youth Can Alike, networks of women and youth that work to prevent and counter violent extremism. Also with Jordan, we established the New York-based group of Friends of Preventing Violent Extremism that prioritizes the role of and the rights of women and youth. We are working with various partners, such as the African Union, that is leading the way for young women and men in engagement in peace and security on their content. But we also support more broadly the UN study on youth, peace and security, and have supported the UN Secretary General's Envoy on youth. And then there is you, the Global Network of Women Peace Builders, and other fabulous partners that are and work with young women. Many young women work for peace within the framework of youth, peace and security, and many young men have become advocates for women's rights and participation as well as for peace within this context. Those are two major gains. Engaging men for this cause is essential, and ensuring that young women are involved on a par with young men is important right now and for the future. We have heard young women leaders here already. You have the creativity, the strength, and the courage to act. The least we could do is to make sure we don't get in your way. And I would say we also have the responsibility to open doors for you and to fuel your engines for all of our benefit. Thank you.
Marita, thank you very much for that. It was the kind of support for young women leaders that we need to hear more of from leaders like yourself. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our second respondent to the youth panel, Anita Bhatia, who is the Deputy Executive Director of UN Women. Over to you, Anita.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be here today with all of you, and deep appreciation to the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders and all co-sponsors, including ourselves, for organizing this really important event. You know, we've heard from a number of really inspirational speakers this morning about the key importance of both the Women, Peace and Security agenda, but also the Youth, Peace and Security agenda. And I'd just like to offer a few reflections based on UN Women's experience, but also on what I've heard this morning. There are three really important issues in ensuring that these interlinked agendas are given the due importance that they deserve in the global discourse today. The first, which several people have already alluded to, is the importance of a seat at the table and the inclusion in decision making. We know that there are a number of resolutions and a number of normative frameworks that actually provide the basis for this decision making. But the key issue is, does this actually get implemented? And there's a very big gap today between what's written on paper and what actually happens. So I'd like to focus attention on what are the key practical things that we can do to actually execute against an agenda that we all believe in, that unfortunately lags implementation in spite of very good intentions. So doing this requires a multi-pronged approach. First, investments in the capacity of young people to have a seat at the table, to have their voice be heard, and to have agency. We heard from Rimu about how investment in her capacities helped her to bring issues to the table. So this kind of investment in capacity building is really important. And the independent progress study on YPS provides a useful framework for partnering with and investing in young people to prevent violence, to promote their inclusion, and to translate the demographic dividend that we all know exists into an actual peace dividend. So there are strategies on paper. The real issue is converting them into something real. And these three mutually reinforcing tactics that the study talked about, which is investing in their capacities and agencies, in funding support, in network building, in systemic change, and in addressing structural barriers, are all critically important. And UN Women actually does this. Part of our work is to help young women emerge as peace builders at different decision-making levels. So for example, we have been working with young women in Libya, in Yemen, in Syria, in Iraq, in Bangladesh, to help increase their impact on peace negotiations and the implementation of peace agreements. So I think that is really important. The second piece, which is critical to further this agenda, is something that, again, we talk a great deal about when we talk about the digital gender gap, but it is the investment actually in data and evidence to show how are outcomes actually different when you have this investment? We do not have enough of an evidence base yet to make this case. Although there is apocryphal evidence and emerging evidence from years of seeing the difference in outcomes when we have women having a seat at the table, we actually need to invest in building a global database that does the same for the participation of young people. Because when we are able to make a case on the basis of data, we are able to change people's opinions and change their hearts and minds. And having good data and evidence for decision making will also be tremendously helpful to further this agenda. And then, you know, for us at UN Women, and I was very happy to hear both ministers, Gould and Andersson, refer to our leadership role in generation equality. And we are delighted, of course, with the participation of Canada, of Finland, of Norway in the Generation Equality Action Coalitions. But the Action Coalitions and the Generation Equality Platform are the kinds of initiatives that can serve to reinforce the importance of these agendas. We are very proud to be acting as the secretariat of the recently announced Compact on WPS and Humanitarian Action, which will commemorate the 20th anniversary of 1325 and the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Platform. But when you actually look at the results of where we are today and what the aspirations were in those resolutions and in the Beijing Platform, we have to acknowledge that we are actually a long way from getting there. And unfortunately, the pandemic has made things much worse. So we are facing the real possibility and of regression on many fronts, and therefore it is even more important than it has ever been to continue to invest financially, but also in terms of political will to keep these agendas alive. And I do want to say one final word, and that is Ambassador Singer talked about the work that's being done in the Dominican Republic about moving some of these agendas. These country examples are so important, and I salute you, Ambassador, for sharing what you are doing. And it is my sincere hope as you know, the leadership of UN Women to see other countries following that example. So the more we can do through platforms like Generation Equality to disseminate best practice, the better it will be. UN Women stands ready to play its role. We very much appreciate the partnership that we have with many countries and our donors to continue to push on this agenda, both in the fora at the UN, but also outside the UN system itself, because given the nature and the complexity of the agenda, this is not something that we can do without partnership. We want to work both with our member states, but also with the organizations such as the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders and with young people's organizations to continue to push for this agenda, and most importantly, for implementation of the agenda. Thank you very much, and over.
Deputy Executive Director Bhatia, thank you very much for your remarks. And we are running a bit over time, and so I'm going to change the format just a little bit. We're going to go to the question and answer. The questions are being directed to Ms. Lou Zandujar, who's representing Ambassador Singer at this point for the Dominican Republic, as well as, of course, to our Special Envoy, Marita, and Deputy Executive Director Anita. And how we're going to do this is we'll have 3 questions that will be asked by each of the youth leaders, and then I'll turn it over to the respondents. So if we could begin, please, with Lynn Rose Genot, or Jenon from the Philippines, to ask a question on behalf of Asmin. Lynn Rose.
Hello, good evening. I am Lynn Rose, and I am part of the Young Women Leaders for Peace in the Philippines. We are a network of young women and young LGBT leaders from the Philippines. So my question is, I'm asking this question in behalf of Asmin Munib, and this is directed to the Special Envoy for WPS in Norway, Ms. Marita Sørheim Rensvik. My question is, how does Norway advocate for the meaningful participation of young women in peace agreement implementation and support their peace building initiatives in the Philippines? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lynn Rose, on behalf of Asmin and your Young Women Leaders for Peace in the Philippines. Now I'd like to go to Hila, please, the Cora Weiss Fellow from Afghanistan, to set out your question, Hila.
Thank you, Senator Marilu. My question is for the Dominican Republic. First of all, thank you so much for working on the new resolution 222535. My question is, what are your hopes for the localization and implementation of UNSCR 2535? How do you think it will facilitate an increase in the meaningful participation of young women in ongoing peace processes, including peace negotiations such as the upcoming intra-Afghan peace talks? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hila. And then for our next question, if I could invite Nicole from the DRC to ask a question, please.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to ask the question. And my question is directly to the Deputy Executive Director for the UN Women. So we know that women economic empowerment is directly linked to conflict prevention and ensuring sustainable peace. Despite this, we as young women find it difficult to be taken seriously by decision makers. So what are your recommendations to bring decision makers invest in young women's economic empowerment, and what is UN Women doing to support this? Thank you.
Those are great questions. And now I'd like to turn over to our respondents to reply. And if I could ask you please to keep your response to about 1.5 to 2 minutes. And I'd like to begin with Councillor Luz Andujar for Ambassador Singer of the Dominican Republic to respond to the question addressed.
Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you, Hila. I would bet that Ambassador Singh here wanted to answer the question himself, but regretfully he had to run to a previous commitment that came up last minute. But to answer your question, we do look at 2535 as a resolution that has set significant goals for the operationalization and implementation of the YPS agenda, as Ambassador Singh here has mentioned before. But we see that there's a great momentum now that the resolution is embedded officially in the Security Council agenda. We think it will be yielding more and better action by all stakeholders, because with it comes accountability, as others have mentioned before. And that is key here. When we want to talk about implementation, we need to talk alongside accountability. But the reality is that implementation relies in part with political will, with leadership capacity, and resources by stakeholders. It is the role of all of us to keep an eye on it, again, to ensure accountability, as has been mentioned also by Nicole before. That resolution 2535 is indeed being implemented. And regarding your second question, the lack of women's meaningful participation in these processes presents, of course, a major challenge to global efforts to resolve conflict. We, as the Security Council, held an area formula recently on July 27 to ensure women's participation and promoting their rights in Afghan peace processes. And these are part of the efforts that we are making in ensuring women in Afghanistan's feel the council's back on their participation are guaranteed. During this meeting, the Dominican Republic insisted very much in the importance of the participation, specifically of young women in all stages and dimensions of the peace process to guarantee its sustainability possibilities to materialize. And we're clear on that. However, in order to facilitate young women's participation, many of you have already pointed out other strategies and ideas on how to make this happen. We have heard also from efforts being made by UN Women, for example. In general, we also think that protocols must be put in place to ensure engagement in formal peace negotiations by young women. Financing, as Deputy Executive Director Anita Batia has mentioned, it's paramount. The specific funding should be allocated aimed at increasing young women's, particularly on their participation in parties delegations. But also we see the group of Friends of Acting Women as playing a key role in this regard. Central here is to keep and strongly advocating for it, both with the parties and the facilitating countries, in order to guarantee young women's participation in the upcoming intra-Afghan peace talks. So again, accountability, strong advocacy, resourcing, and strategies by all stakeholders is important here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And now I would like to go to Special Envoy Marita Sorheim-Rensvik to respond to the question addressed to her.
Yes, thank you. And I'm pleased to say that we do more than advocate for young women's participation in the Philippines. Our peace and reconciliation work in the Philippines is multifaceted, undertaken in partnership with a lot of different actors. I've been gathering examples from different processes, and I'll give you a short overview from what we do in the Philippines in this regard. Our work aligns very closely with the post-conflict work within the Bangsamoro Peace Agreement of 2014. Norway is engaged with the formal post-conflict transitional authority in their policymaking and strategic planning work for the Bangsamoro. And we support civil society interactions with government and business, where we specifically, where young women's participation platforms are both encouraged and supported. We lead the post-conflict decommissioning work through the co-chairmanship of the independent decommissioning body. And in fact, both Norwegian and Filipino young women are involved in the MILF's decommissioning efforts. We partner on peace initiatives with multilateral organizations, local government units, youth organizations, grassroots community leaders, blah, blah, blah. Former rebels, a lot of different actors. We work closely with the UN. I want to recognize Deputy ED Anita Batia. UN Women is one of our closest allies in women, peace and security. And we also work with them as well as UNFPA, IOM, UNICEF, etc. in the Philippines to strengthen young women's role in conflict-affected communities. For instance, in addition to that, we work with, for instance, the Center for Peace Education of the Miriam College in creating Young Women Mediators Group. They have produced a documentary that narrates the process of organizing and training women as mediators and their success in mediating conflicts in their villages. We support pioneer work of the IOM in organizing local government units and youth groups and communities around livelihoods, job and student opportunities in the most remote conflict zones in Basilan, Sulu, and Tawi-Tawi. Here, young women and men hopefully rendered less susceptible to ISIS groups' recruitment efforts, and the youth population is linked to local government and regional government opportunities for education and employment. We work with UN Women on women community leaders and their conflict responses during COVID-19. And young women were a part of their livelihood opportunities during the lockdowns. We work with UNFPA and IOM in organizing the decommissioner of former MILF rebels on the Bangsamoro Women Auxiliary Brigade. And now we work with young women in that regard. Young women combatants are trained by IOM and help in mapping the needs of the communities on their transition and normalization plan. Well, the list is actually quite long for a lot of different processes, but I'll stop there. But just as you can tell, I think it's hard to say this is what we're doing because it's part of a lot of different partnerships with a lot of different actors. And I'm pleased to say that young women Filipinos are contributing greatly to the peace and reconciliation work that we are happy to take part in the Philippines. Thank you.
Thank you, Special Envoy, for such a substantive reply to the question addressed to you. And I'd now like to invite the Deputy Executive Director of UN Women, Batya, to please respond to the question that was addressed to her. Anita?
Thank you very much. And thank you, Nicole, for the question on, what is it that we can do to persuade decision makers to invest in young women's economic empowerment. First, let me say that I think this has to be a question of national priority. Certainly donors can help, but it actually has to be nationally owned. And when we look at what is happening at the country level, I think it would be fair to say that notwithstanding the great work that I think UN Women is doing to help on this agenda, and I'll give you a few examples of that, we actually need to see a lot more governments take up this issue of empowering young people and allowing young women in particular to achieve a state of economic empowerment through support from the government. So what's really important here? First and foremost, I will come back to the point that I made earlier, which is on evidence and data, because nothing convinces a Minister of Finance with very limited resources and with a need to allocate monies across different possible areas of spend than the evidence that there will be a very good return on that money. And so let me give you an example actually from another sphere. When I think of the story of microfinance in Bangladesh, for a long time, women were considered very poor credit risks. Nobody wanted to lend women money because they were afraid that they would not get the money back. But with the example of Grameen Bank in Bangladesh, the world got an example and saw very clearly that women could be very good credit risks and that they actually repaid loans faster than men. Once that happened and that piece of evidence got out in the world, the whole microfinance industry took off all over the world, and there were microfinance models that were replicating what had happened in Bangladesh, in Latin America, and in Africa. And this has made a huge difference in the access that women have to funding. So we need similar models of things that are working for young people, and we need to spread knowledge of those examples across the system. And here's where UN Women's role comes in, because we can help in terms of training young people. We are training young people actually in Bangladesh, young female university students, on leadership skills, but also on basic business skills and on social businesses that can promote social cohesion and can promote peace. So we are doing that in Bangladesh. For example, in Guatemala, we have another intervention where we are working with survivors of conflict-related sexual violence, which is enabling young women to secure funding for economic empowerment initiatives. And we have a number of these across the globe. So it is incumbent on us as well as our donors to take these models of early success and to share them across the system so that policymakers understand what works and are willing to allocate resources for that. One final point is that the role of civil society and women's movements is really important because, and I'm really, really worried about the fact that the pandemic has actually decimated many organizations across the world. We need young people's organizations and women's organizations to continue to make the case for investing in young women's economic empowerment, and civil society offers a mirror to the government which it can hold up and say, in your national development plans, are you paying enough attention to this issue? And so I would just appeal to all of our donors to continue to do the good work that you are doing to fund civil society and to keep young women's organizations in particular alive and well funded, because we do need that accountability mechanism to be active and to be a strong voice for continued investment in this area. Thank you.
thank you very much for addressing the key points in the question and giving us some very helpful practical examples. I would now like to bring this panel to a close and thank with great enthusiasm and sincerity our opening speakers, Minister Gould and Minister Andersson, as well as Ambassador Singer and Councillor Andujar, who stepped in for him, and Special Envoy Sorhem Rensvik from Norway, and Deputy Executive Director of UN Women, Batia, and of course to our incredible panelists and youth leaders who gave us so much information and asked such good questions. And really it all rolls up into our understanding the crucial significance, particularly after and during this pandemic sweeping our world, that is sweeping away rights and sweeping away opportunities for women and girls all over the world, that it's a synergy between the UN Security Council resolutions and the policies that have been built upon them, making that connection at the nexus between the Women, Peace and Security suite of resolutions and now the Youth, Peace and Security suite of resolutions. And what it comes down to is implementation, implementation, implementation. It is my great pleasure to introduce my cherished colleague on the board of GNWP, Dr. Rima Saleh. Dr. Saleh is the former UNICEF Deputy Executive Director, was a member of the 2015 UN High-Level Independent Panel on Peace Operations, and she will now moderate our panel on youth leadership on global issues, promoting intersectional change on the front lines from racial justice to access to education in COVID-19. Dr. Saleh, over to you.
Thank you, Senator McFadden, and thank you for your commitment for the rights of women and young women in the world. It gives me a great pleasure and honor to be with you on this very auspicious occasion and moderate session 2. We have with us very esteemed and distinguished speakers and panelists to talk about their achievements and commitment to social justice, human rights, peace and development requires more moments than we have now. So I invite you to see their full bios in the chat box. It is now my honor to introduce our speaker, our first speaker, Madame Desiree Schweitzer, Director General for Development Cooperation from the Austrian Ministry for European and International Affairs. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saleh, and good evening to everyone, to all distinguished participants from Vienna. It's a very great pleasure for me to be with you tonight to participate in this very important event. Austria is a strong and early supporter of the objectives laid out in UN Security Council Resolution 1325, both in our national policies as well as in our development cooperation and humanitarian assistance policies. The inclusion of women in peace process is one of the main goals in our national action plan on implementing UN Security Council Resolution 1325. Like previous speakers, we are convinced that sustainable peace and security can only be achieved by ensuring equal participation of women and men of all ages in the prevention, management, and resolution of conflict. We believe that we cannot achieve in any society, in any conflict in this world, lasting peace and security if we exclude 50% of the society. That is why Austria supports the global network of women peacebuilders in the establishment and capacity building, a word that has been mentioned many times before at the previous panel, and is very important. Capacity building of young women leaders network in Georgia, South Sudan, Uganda, and Ukraine. And I'm proud to note that some of these young women are already taking up a very active part in peace building, conflict prevention, as well as humanitarian response during the pandemic in their countries and in their communities. In February of this year, before social distancing rules and travel restrictions were imposed due to COVID-19, we had the great pleasure to co-host in Vienna the Global Women's Forum for Peace and Humanitarian Action, together with our partners, the GNWP and the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund. Over the course of 2 days, we were able to welcome 70 women, grassroots activists from 17 countries across Africa, Asia, Europe, the South Caucasus, Middle East, and North Africa, Latin America, and the Pacific. They demonstrated to us not only what can be achieved directly on the ground, but also how crucial it is to uplift women's voices of all ages to bring about positive change, as well as inclusive and long-lasting peace. As reflected in the Vienna Declaration, the outcome document of the Global Women's Forum, young women around the world are actively supporting peace processes. However, they remain largely unrepresented, if not entirely excluded from funding and from decision-making that directly affects peace and security in their countries and communities, as well as their future more broadly. The same applies to the situation in refugee and IDP camps, where the majority of decision makers and leaders are men. As a result, the needs of women and young women, refugees, internally displaced, and host communities often remain invisible and unaddressed. This makes it difficult and at times unsafe for women of all ages to access services and aid. Our collective efforts in ensuring gender equality, equal rights, and opportunities among young people put them in a position to challenge and redefine traditional gender norms and relations in order to form the foundations of an egalitarian, democratic, just, and peaceful society. We have to avoid that the return to peace may only amount to a return to a status where women are systematically excluded from structures of power, or where abuses of women's rights remain intricately woven into the fabric of everyday life. Especially now, during this unprecedented global crisis, we cannot allow for this pandemic to set us back on previous achievements in the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. More than ever, it is important to ensure women's and particularly young women's equal representation in all response planning and decision-making, also COVID-19 related. Hopefully, post-pandemic recovery will lead to an expansion of rights and participation of women in public affairs, producing a society more resilient to future such crises. We know that women's inclusion in peace-building processes is essential for long-term success. After all, peace only works if women are included in political participation and representation. In all situations, such as in transition from conflict to peaceful societies, in recovering from a pandemic, in standing up for racial justice, and in climate change mitigation and adaptation, young women take a crucial role. Young women are peace builders and agents of change. Their aspirations, views, and demands need to be heard. Their potential must be harnessed and their plight addressed. We, as members of the international community, must be inclusive of young women and adequately represent, engage, and address their needs and expectations. These are the reasons why I immediately accepted this invitation. I'm very happy to be part of this event and to hear and listen to you and learn more from you. Thank you very much. And back to you, Dr. Salam.
Thank you, Madam Schweitzer. Thank you for your commitment. And thank you for the commitment of your country and the groundbreaking conference and forum in February. We were all there, and also we enjoyed your hospitality. So now we proceed to the panel, but before that, I would like to remind you that to share your question as panelists via the question and answer function, and also to remind, unfortunately, the panelists, because we don't have too much time, that there will be 30-second wrap-up warning on the screen to help with timekeeping. So it is my pleasure now to introduce the Honorable Sara Elago, a member of parliament from the Philippines. Honorable Elago, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Sala. Greetings to the GNWP, organizers, the honorable speakers, panelists, and attendees. As a young woman member of Congress and party list representative of the youth sector in the Philippines, it is our obligation to perform the mandate of raising the voices of the marginalized. The advocacy on sustainable peace and gender equality is an integral part of our work as a youth legislator. We do not want to inherit a future where there is more of the abuse, discrimination, corruption, exploitation, and polarization we see, hear, and experience today. It is clear to us that there can be no peace without justice based on human rights and socioeconomic development for all. Hence, our youth legislative focuses on education, employment and industrialization, agrarian reform and rural development, health and social services, good governance, the struggle for the rights to self-determination of our national minorities, and gender equality to contribute to broader peace-building efforts, which are a collective pursuit of the youth, however diverse our backgrounds are. We unite in this common agenda towards sustainable peace. This is all because the youth, as inheritors of the future, have the highest stake in the peace process based on addressing the roots of armed conflict. Our country, likewise, has a long history of movement for positive societal change. And so we do recognize the imperative to safeguard the victories of those before us for the next generations to come. Top of our legislative agenda is on quality and accessible education that is key to raising awareness, promoting critical thinking, developing empathy, respecting diversity, bridging gaps, and understanding perspectives. It is vital for empowerment of the youth. It is essential for the promotion and protection of human rights for just society. Our youth party has long fought for measures to democratize access, to improve the quality of education for all, and to uphold academic freedom through built-in resolutions on the Declaration of Safe Schools, students' rights, the equitable access to food, health, and housing services in schools, and the mandatory inclusion of subjects on human rights, peace, education, and media and information literacy, among others. While the Youth Party has an inspiring record of legislative accomplishments, there's still so much more to be done in implementation, financing, and oversight for better, bolder, and broader representation. There is a need for continued assertion, engagement, and lobbying to get more support, solidarity, and action, not only from Congress, but from our fellow young people taking charge, youth-serving organizations, agencies, and international networks and formations. Especially now that the COVID-19 pandemic has magnified long-existing inequalities and further exposed major weaknesses in our governance system. In the Philippines, before COVID-19, 1 out of 4 young people are not in education, employment, and training. Now, in the midst of a public health emergency, there is a record high unemployment as millions of overseas and domestic workers lose their jobs, and a number of businesses are already forced into closing or turning down operations. Government debt skyrockets while the economy dips at a historic low. Despite having one of the longest lockdowns in the world, COVID-19 cases are still rising, and the prospect of controlling its spread the soonest remains dim without a comprehensive health-focused, rights-based, and participatory approach to the pandemic response. To contribute to efforts in addressing the issues, the youth are working with and alongside the people at the helm of responding to the pandemic and emerging from this crisis as health professionals, researchers, relief volunteers, key workers, and public officials. But we can offer so much more, given the opportunities to practice leadership. We have explored new creative ways to conduct massive consultations, donation drives, and relief work, education campaign on the role of the youth in defeating COVID-19. Through legislation, we are working on ways to build policies that ensure that no one is denied their right to health, and the push for expanding our public healthcare system. We are working on building partnerships and collaborations that are essential for building greater impact. For instance, we work with the Right for Education Network, the Cure COVID Network, the ASEAN Parliamentarians for Human Rights, the Better Normal Movement, led by Greenpeace for a green and just recovery. And so we have witnessed the power in youth and involvement and better representation. So in observance of the International Youth Day 2020, we join and urge all of you to enable the youth to protect their rights, to raise their voices, and hold power to account. Threats and attacks against organizations, formations, and young people must end. We must defend the frontline role of the young women in human rights, justice, peace, and climate initiatives. We must get organized with a sense of urgency, for we cannot inherit a future that is no longer livable. Let us not allow any form of discrimination, abuse, and exploitation to be part of the pandemic response and recovery. We can make it. We must win with the people, for the people, and the planet.
Yeah.
Stay healthy and hopeful. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Honorable Elago, and thank you for your impressive work in the Parliament of the Philippines. So I have the pleasure now to introduce Pedrito Paul, a member of the African Union Youth Advisory Council from Tanzania. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Madam Rima. Your Excellencies, honorable members, fellow panelists, it's a great pleasure to be part of this session today, and I'll just highlight what have we done from the African Union level and trickling it down to our country level. What have we done in line with peace building and promoting gender equality despite COVID-19 and the effects of the pandemic. So far, we're actually working to champion the AU agenda, silencing the guns by 2030. So ideally, the African Union level, through the Office of the AU Youth Envoy, we are working to promote young people who are working in peace building, especially the young women in several countries, from South Sudan, from Libya, from Central African Republic, and also the 5 regions of Africa, meaning East, South, West, North, Central Africa. Ideally, what have we done up to date is to drive the conversations around different initiatives that the young people have been doing in line with actually silencing the guns, whereby we, for our end, we see and we vision peace building to be something that affects education, affects health, affects gender, and affects even the accessibility of employment for young people and young women, especially the fact that majority of the young women and young people per se are being recruited in different violent extremism acts due to lack of employment in this pandemic area. So how are we demystifying the bubble around helping different young women and the general young people at large? Through the Office of the AU Youth Envoy, we've launched the Youth Silencing the Guns campaign, which only does not mean dropping the guns or dropping the bullets, but also means how best we can profile different youth projects across Africa that are working to promote peace building. And this also involves different young people who are in the diaspora, the young Africans in the diaspora that are working to promote peace building initiatives. And through the Silencing the Guns campaign, we're actually working to award about 12 young people's projects that are actually working to promote peace building across Africa, which can be able to support their further interventions towards promoting peace building. But generally, ideally, we have a lot of engagement from different young people who are trying to find solutions within this COVID-19 pandemic era on how best they can be protected also from insecurity issues that are happening within their countries. So ideally, we have led several interventions in line to support the young people through different helplines initiatives that we are currently conducting with the Africa Center for Disease and Control, but also working with the African Union Peace and Security Department. So ideally, I'm speaking more from an intergovernmental level on how best young people are working with different government institutions and UN agencies to actually promote peace building within their countries, but how are they mobilizing their fellow young people within the various regional blocks. So we're talking about the Southern African Development Community Youth Wing, East African Community Youth Wing, ECOWAS, all the young people, how can they best galvanize efforts and promote peace building within their particular countries. However, so far up to date, we have actually also launched an online platform that profiles young women who are working on peace building in Africa and Africans in the diaspora. So it's through the Sauti blog that we've managed to actually share the stories of young people who are actually promoting peace building during the pandemic. Ideally, this was only targeted to young women from the age of 18 to 35 years old. And this is an ongoing process that we are currently doing. And I've really heard from my previous speakers on how different interventions and different efforts have been put into place to help young women per se, looking at the work that has been done from the Philippines, as shared by Honorable Sarah Elago and other panelists. So ideally, from my end, that's the particular submission I'd like to share. And it's all about how we're galvanizing efforts as young people to actually ensure that the work still goes on despite COVID-19, and how we're finding creative solutions to bring the jointed efforts through different levels, from intergovernmental level, UN agency, and different young people in the ranks to actually influence change within our communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Petrider, and thank you for your commitment to peace, you and all the young people in Africa. I happened to work for many, many years in Africa, and I witnessed the commitment of all young people and also of the African Union to peace and security. So now it's my pleasure also to introduce Philomena Wakenge, the founder of the Freedom Fighters DC, which is based in the USA. Philomena, yes.
Hello, everyone. Greetings to everyone, my fellow panelists, and all these amazing leaders that I didn't think I would be talking to at this age, so I'm very excited. First and foremost, I want to thank you guys for having me. The real first step to real peace is creating spaces where individuals can stand against their systems of government without constant retaliation for exercising their rights. I founded Freedom Fighters DC to provide a space where we could tactically stand against the current oppressive American government on behalf of Black people. We have raised over $150,000, which has been allocated to providing COVID-19 relief, combating health disparities, protester bailouts, and providing mutual aid to the most vulnerable of our communities. We have provided training on peaceful protesting and how to defend oneself against militarized DC police. Our first event on Capitol Hill, which was nationally televised, we released a list of local and national demands that specifically condemned the increase of DCPD funding, and where these funds would be allocated to combat homelessness, food deserts, and health disparities that are prevalent in the DC area. My board was majority women, with many of us being tired of our voices being ignored. American government systems do not uphold their own constitutional laws with constant creation of loopholes that protect white supremacy. America seeks to divide and degrade marginalized women, which is evident in the invasive reproductive laws made by majority white males. It comes to no surprise over time that police brutality has only gotten worse with laws such as the Law Enforcement Officers Bill, which protects officers from real accountability without legal protection. Black women have been victims of police violence and violent legislative laws that disproportionately affect us. We are only seen as humane when we are being used for political propaganda or when we are needed to win elections. I mourn for all the Black men affected by police brutality, but we must ask ourselves, why did it take Breonna Taylor being murdered in the most horrendous method in her own home for us to become part of the conversation? The most severe violence invoked by police officers, excuse me guys, Black women are routinely brutalized by the police in ways that do not cause death. The feminist movement was created to unite women, but once obtained specific liberties, white women in America disposed us. Despite our dismissal and neglection, mainstream feminists have attempted to discuss violence against women, relegating the experiences of Asian women, Native American women, Latinas, and Black women into one category coined as women of color. Although we experience marginalization, this has caused a lumping of our experiences, which tends to mask the complexity of violence in each community. It takes us being murdered in the most inhumane way for our humanity to be acknowledged and the violence we face daily. Although young Black women are at the front lines of this movement, we are disrespected and neglected until our votes are needed for an election, like right now. We are never invited to conversations that significantly affect our lives, and that is why the adoption of Resolution 2535 is critical on a domestic level. If the world is going to wait for America to hold itself accountable, it will never occur. America was founded on colonization and white supremacy, which is still being upheld by many Republicans who view it as a way of life rather than a terrorist organization. Education and economic opportunities were already disproportionately accessible to marginalized groups here before COVID, but COVID-19 has worsened the situation. I'm not sure what the news media shows you, but we are in shambles in this country. Our government system is systemically neglecting to provide the monetary support needed to sustain school districts that serve these groups. The healthcare system has been designed to prioritize white lives over any type of lives, not just Black lives, Native American lives, Latina lives, and so on and so forth. Economic opportunities are being monopolized to cater to the white population while leaving every other group to fend for themselves. We are suffering, although I have known suffering my entire life as a refugee and a Black woman in America, if there's not international intervention, I fear the death tolls that continue to increase among the marginalized population will lead to eradication of certain groups, specifically indigenous groups. All right groups here are protected by the president, as many of you have seen through the media. There is no safe haven for us. There is no law that protects us. That's why protesters are being taken from streets in unmarked vehicles, turning up dead, hung, lynched. In 2020, there are people turning up dead, hanging. It sounds like the most surreal situation to ever experience. Being here, I'm scared every day. I'm scared to voice myself. I'm scared to even speak my piece, but I do it anyways because I understand that silence only perpetuates racism. So I ask of you, the same way that the UN and Peacebuilders liberated me as a child in the Congo, I would ask that intervention and real effort be employed by the Secretary of the Youth Envoy in order to make this a real resolution in the United States of America.
Thank you very much, Philomena, and thank you for your courageous work on the streets of the United States to fight racial justice. Thank you very much, and we heard your message. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Muzun Limlihan, a Syrian activist and UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador. Muzun, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rima Saleh, and I am so proud to be here with all of you. It was so inspiring to hear everybody. In fact, as we all know, 2020 has been a very challenging year for all of us because of the outbreak of coronavirus, and it has added a lot of challenges to our world, as our world already has been suffering from different issues and the challenges. But what the pandemic has done is that deepening and exposing those existing challenges, whether these challenges actually in terms of education, in terms of access to resources, in terms of healthcare. We have seen in many countries healthcare wasn't possible for many people. Education was disrupted. For example, 1.5 billion of school children weren't able, where actually their education was disrupted, and they were forced to study remotely, and digital learning was a bit challenging for them. And I was one of those young people who were affected by digital learning, and I can feel and understand how difficult it is. But I feel so sad about those ones who couldn't actually have access even to remote learning, and many of them, they don't have technology, they don't have electricity, many of them even don't have TVs and radios to support them to have access to education during the pandemic, and they don't have access like their peers in other countries to digital learning, which is something the pandemic has shown us, and we have to work on it. So from this regard, actually, I have been using my platform to shed the light and to spread awareness about those inequalities, and to remind all of us that access to education is so important for everybody, and also those marginalized and those who live in poverty, those who are out of school, those who cannot actually have access to remote learning. We are here to work for them, we are here to listen for them, and also to do something for them. That's why I have been using my voice even during the pandemic to raise awareness about what they have been facing. And I think this is something we have to work on it, because education indeed has been affected deeply and fundamentally through this crisis. And to be honest, during COVID-19, we have learned, and I personally remembered many challenges. So for example, it has reminded me of my own experience when the conflict has started in Syria in 2011, when actually we had kind of similar challenges. So we had the same fear to go to school, we had the same fear sometimes not to have access to our basic needs. And we have seen this globally now as the pandemic has affected all of us. And I have learned personally from this pandemic that young people actually more affected, like conflict. So not only conflict can make us in a position that we are vulnerable, but also things can come suddenly like the pandemic and affect us. So this is a great motivation to work together, to remember any challenge in this world, any crisis, any pandemic, it can affect all of us, and we have to work on it together, and to remember those who are already suffering, not only from the pandemic, but from other challenges. And the pandemic is something more on their challenges, and they are suffering even more. So I feel from this point, we have to listen more to young people, to use their potential, to use their ideas through education, because this cannot be done without education, because education indeed can open the doors in front of those young people to discover their dreams, to learn new skills, to learn what they need in this life. And to be honest, I am so hopeful about everybody like me as a young person, because all of them, they are doing a great job. They are using initiatives. They are now using their voices for a better world. And I have seen this when I go globally and meet with young people. All of them, they have hope, they have resilience, they have the ability to actually change this world. And I think just they need an opportunity, they need somebody to listen to them, they need support from adults to make these ideas into actions. And I think not only young people must work alone, all of us, we have to work effectively to change our world and to make it a better place. Because to be honest, COVID-19 is affecting all of us. And this reminds us to work more in education, because during this pandemic, we knew the priority of education is so fundamental. As without education, we cannot have better doctors, better nurses, and better health systems. So I hope all of us can come together and find solutions for giving education for everybody, and I mean equality education. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Muzun, and thank you for being the UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador. And in this function, you were able to amplify the voices of all young women, and also to the basic needs of people that live in situation of displacement. And I like the word hope. You brought the word hope. So I think we are all hopeful when we all work together. Thank you very much, Muzun.
Thank you.
Before we hear our next panelist, I'd like to turn your attention to a short video clip of the Colectivo Las Tesis well-known song El Violador en tu Camino. Thank you. I now give the floor to the Colectivo Las Tesis, which is a feminist collective from Chile. You have the floor.
You are muted.
Mm-hmm. Yes?
Thank you. Hello everyone. Hola,
Thank
hola.
you.
Hola. Todos. Colectivo Las Tesis. We are from Valparaíso. We would like to thank the organization for this invitation, also all the speakers in these very interesting and necessary panels. We are a feminist collective, and also what's very important to say that we are an artistic collective. The way, the tools that we have chosen to fight against gender violence are through art, through an interdisciplinary artistic form. We became quite well known in the context of a big uprise, a social uprise in a country that became in October of last year, and that is still kind of happening, but right now with the pandemic context, we are in lockdown still, so it's been a little bit complicated. And as for us and other people also denouncing different types of violence, what we have done is that we have adapted our work that is based on our bodies and in performance to other platforms, specifically digital platforms. And what we generally do is that when we started working together, actually, like around a little bit of more than 2 years ago, our main objective was to spread feminist theory. We think that sadly, there's not enough access to these ideas in the formal curriculums, for example, in education. So we decided through art to spread these ideas, and in this translation to other languages and to artistic languages, maybe we will have the chance to touch more people with this, you know, like to really make hopefully a change also of conscious violence against women and people from the LGBTQII+ community. That's our fight. Is the denouncement of gender violence, is the denouncement of the oppression against our bodies from patriarchy and also from this capitalist and neoliberal system that we can see pretty much worldwide. That's probably why our performance was later replicated in over 40 countries, because we can see that the base of our problem and our oppressions is patriarchy and capitalism, that's for sure. Also in this adaptation that we do of our work to digital platforms, for example, but still through art, because we are artists and also activists, it's because we think that we can't be silent anymore. We can't just shut ourselves and also be locked down, like literally at homes, and be relegated one more time to the domestic environment and to the private environment. We deserve to raise our voices in the public, how do you say, in the public space, in the streets. And if today we can't do it on the streets, then we will do it through digital platforms. For us, it's very important to keep our fight and to keep this space of enunciations that also now as a collective we have, and that we are very grateful also for that matter. And regarding the subject also of this panel about peace and how we can build peace, we are certain that the only way to have a real world peace or peace in our different territories is with the end of gender violence, of this type of oppressions, yes, and also for everyone in all types of society. As long as there's people being violented, being oppressed, we are not going to be able to have a real peaceful environment, that's for sure also. And yes, that's all. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Colectivo Las Tesis, to use your art to bring, you know, peace in the world. Thank you very much, and justice particularly. Thank you. So as we are running late, I ask you if we can extend for 15 minutes the webinar, as we like to hear all our speakers. So thank you very much. And now it's my honor to introduce His Excellency Dominique Favre, Chargé d'Affaires at the Permanent Mission of Switzerland to the UN, to respond to our panelists.
Thank you so much for having us participating at this meeting. Several of you said they were so proud to be here, but I can tell you that listening to all these interventions, I am not only proud, but I'm super happy and confident about the future development when listening to all the panelists this morning. I would also like to thank the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders for their excellent organization, for the excellent organization of this meeting. It's a bit a state-of-the-art virtual encounter we have here, and several of us will certainly use this as a good example on how you can interact and be very, very lively and during such a meeting. But this be maybe something else still before I start with more formal points. I speak here as Chargé of Switzerland, but I am also this year the vice president of the executive board of UNICEF, and I'm very, very happy to see the role that UNICEF also plays in this area. And this is also important in my view to have not only UNICEF part of the humanitarian or the development area, but also in the area of peace building, and your presence here, Dr. Sala, but also Musoon and others I've just heard really contribute very much to this. Thank you so much. And all what I've heard here shows and very clearly that the inclusion of women, and in particular young women, is not only important because we believe in women's rights to participate on all levels and on all equal basis in all aspects of society, but much more because equal participation and leadership of both women and men, as well as the inclusion of youth, strengthen society's resilience and their peaceful development. With the adoption of the resolution 1325, the international community recognized that the inclusion of women in conflict resolution and peace-building efforts and equality between women and men are fundamental for sustainable peace. But 20 years later, some progress has been achieved, sure, but there is still an evident gap between the normative framework and its implementation. As we heard and saw today, women, including young women, are at the forefront in responding to crises, such as the current pandemic and humanitarian emergencies. There are countless examples of women and youth organizations leading negotiations, organizing humanitarian responses, and advocating for peaceful conflict resolution efforts. However, there are as many examples of their access to high-level decision-making and negotiation processes being limited by structural barriers or a lack of political will. In addition, young people constitute a large proportion of the population in countries affected by armed conflicts. Currently, many young people see a worsening of their situation due to the threat of COVID-19. It is therefore crucial that the response to the crisis, as well as any efforts to build a sustainable peace, be gender sensitive and inclusive. Women's and youth opinions, views, and experiences need to be included in the search for solutions supposed to benefit the society as a whole. If we don't break the structural barriers, we deprive ourselves from critical contributions made by young women and men that are drivers of change. So what can a country like Switzerland do to promote this? We adopted a comprehensive foreign policy strategy on gender equality and women's rights in 2017. Strategic priorities entail women's economic empowerment and women's equal and effective participation. Switzerland also prides itself in being one of the first countries to adopt the National Action Plan in order to operationalize Resolution 1325. Since our first NAP in 2007, it was reviewed and updated 3 times. The fourth strategy was launched in 2018. The effective involvement of women in conflict prevention and the inclusion of women in conflict resolution and peace processes are among its priorities. Concretely, under our current strategy, we support young women in their aspiration to enter security policy, arms control, and disarmament through scholarship programs. Also, we explore how to bring more female police officers in peace missions or more female mediators into peace processes. I would also like to mention that Swiss civil society has played an important role in monitoring, implementing our strategy, suggest improvements, and even as a partner for implementation of some of the elements of the official Swiss strategy. Switzerland is also a staunch advocate of greater inclusion of civil society in all its peace-building efforts in partner countries and in its human rights policies. Looking ahead, and I'm concluding, Madam Chair, looking ahead, we will hold jointly with South Africa the co-chairmanship of the Women, Peace and Security Focal Point Network in 2022. Both of our countries have a long-standing tradition of inclusive dialogues for peace and reconstruction, and we aim at bringing forward the implementation of Resolution 1325. Beyond 2022, we are also committed to continue working on strengthening the inclusion of women and youth in peace and security matters as a hopefully elected member of the Security Council for our first ever term in 2023 and 2024. Let me close with the following observation. There is a sophisticated normative framework on women's and youth engagement in peace and security. Also, thanks to the recent adoption of Resolution 2535, championed by our friends from the Dominican Republic, whom I wish to warmly congratulate for their efforts. It is now the state's responsibility to implement these commitments. At the same time, women and youth engagement in supporting the elaboration of practicable measures to implement these global commitments remain crucial to see the normative framework translated into action. Their voice matters more than ever in this global conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellence, Fab, and thank you for your personal commitment and the commitment of your country, Switzerland, for the commitment for 1325, 2535, and for building sustainable peace in the world. Thank you.
Thank you.
We come at the end of our panel, and we have a very nice, but we have short time, a conversation between young women leaders, Madame Schweitzer and His Excellence Favre. So I invite our panelists to ask questions to Madame Schweitzer and Excellence Favre, please. Our panelists.
Hello. Everyone hear me?
Yeah, any question?
Yes, I wanted to ask, being a refugee of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Nicole, very happy to see you and to see someone that looks like me. Being the role that you guys play in the Congo, I was just wondering how someone can get more involved and getting more into the peace builder work and kind of implementing that here and some of the strategies that you guys use overseas.
Thank you. We take another question from the panelists.
Hello, Madam Rima.
Yes.
I have a question basically on how do the several entities support different young women and young people initiatives in Africa per se towards peace building, if it's either through different institutions or are they mechanisms that are in place that they can provide support for young people in Africa to promote peace building in general? That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. And now I ask Madame Schweitzer and Excellence Favre to answer the question.
Hi, Rima. This is Mavic. Unfortunately, Desiree has another commitment, so she has left the conversation. But yeah, I would love to hear from Mr.
Excellence. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mavic. Excellence, Favre?
No problem. I'm happy to answer, but of course I will not be very precise, but maybe first hints. Switzerland focuses a lot of its assistance being development, but also in the area of peace and security, of human rights in Africa. In our strategy that is valid today of the International Cooperation of Switzerland, we focus on fragile context, but especially on Africa with 50% of our intervention. This means that most of our offices and of our staff and people are working in contribution offices and embassies in African countries. So the first answer to get some information, of course, we have embassies and we have heads of cooperation in several countries. I don't know exactly the number, but lots in Southeastern Africa and in West Africa. So you can always address them in RDC. We also have, of course, a very important office. And how do we promote, or how do we work? We work a lot, of course, with the government, because we are a governmental representation, but we base our strategies on very inclusive and participatory elaborated country strategies. So it's very important to be really part of these reflections of the country strategies of the Swiss Development Corporation in the spot, so that you can influence these strategies. This is the first response. The second, in our external foreign affairs policy, gender is one of our top priorities. So all we do is of course driven by this approach. So you can just really get in touch with our headquarters in Bern, with us here at the mission. We would be glad to forward then your request to the Swiss Agency for Development Cooperation, or to the Division of Human Security with your concrete questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellence Pav. Do you have a question to the panelists, Excellence?
No, just reiterating how happy I am to see all this, to see that we are really building on the right, working on the right direction, and you will have our support for Switzerland, the role of women in peace and security, and the role of young women in particular will remain key over the upcoming years. So thank you for your leadership and for your engagement to all.
Thank you, Excellence Favre. And now I would like to thank Madame Schweitzer, although she's not with us now, Excellence Favre, and all our inspiring panelists for joining us and for sharing their activism, their work today. The work each and every one of you does in your communities really help shape the future we want to see, a future free from violence and hatred, which is really a path to building peaceful and just societies. And let's also at the end of that say we all have hope, and partnership is very important to achieve our objectives. I now have the pleasure of turning this back to our overall leader. She's the moderator, but she's our leader, Madame Mavic Cabrera Baleza, who is the founder of CEO of the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders. Mavic, we thank you for your devotion and commitment and your hard work. Back to you, Mavic.
Thank you so much, Rima. And thank you to all our fabulous panelists. I will start by responding to a question raised by Petrita and by Philomena. There are multiple ways that civil society, the UN, governments, development partners like Switzerland, and the national governments do in Africa or in the Democratic Republic of Congo, to be specific, to empower or enhance the capacities of young women leaders. So in GNWP, for example, I already spoke that we have a Young Women Leaders program that is implemented in the Democratic Republic of Congo and South Sudan, and soon in Uganda, and also in Rwanda. And I'm happy to note that we are in discussion with the Swiss Agency for Development Cooperation on this work in Rwanda. So we start with raising awareness and understanding of the international laws that are available to young women. And these international laws should not stay in New York. They need to be domesticated. They need to be implemented at the national and local level. And that's where we work with the young women in ensuring that these international laws are applied in local communities and making a difference in the lives of women and girls. And then we engaged in different projects like what Nicole and Remo shared in literacy education, economic empowerment, using theater for community dialogue, and using social media for advocacy. Now, I have a short announcement that I know will make many of you unhappy, and I really, really apologize. We will have to cut out the general question and answer portion because we're behind time, but we commit that we have noted all of the questions, and we have all of the emails of those who registered, and we will respond. We will coordinate with the panelists, and we will respond to your questions by email. So at this point, I now have the pleasure and honor to call on another amazing young woman leader, Esther Ebo from the Global Kids, to present our call to action, which is based on the fabulous presentations of all of the young leaders and our policymakers. Esther, you have the floor.
Hello, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
So my name is Esther Ebo, and I just want to start by saying how excited and happy I am to be here today. And I prepared our call to action today. I want to say hello to the speakers, respondents, change makers, leaders, and overall astronomical men and women that are leading the charge to a better and greater future. I cannot express enough how incredible it is to be here. I'm 15 years old and only recently coming into my own as an activist and an agent of change. I have seen firsthand the injustices that have a vice-like hold in our world today and have for centuries. And as a New Yorker fighting my own battles with racial injustice and women's rights, I have experienced the inexplicable highs and lows of the fight. My voice is amplified by my involvement, my encounters, and each and every facet of my identity that is in danger every single day. I have skin in the game, and so does everybody here. And I can say that if anybody here today is watching, waiting, and listening for a chance, an opportunity, or even a reason to make a difference, this is your personal invitation. We cannot wait another 200 years to see gender equality. We cannot hold our breath and hope that a solution falls from the sky. Baby steps, infighting, baseless compromise, and divide is never going to bring the healing and growth that the women pressed under the thumb of patriarchy and oppression so desperately need. The very fabric of our world is at stake right now, and right now is the time to do something. We as young people have rocked the world with our leadership on pressing global issues. Our leadership has brought new approaches to advocacy, championing the agenda for gender equality and sustainable peace. Young women have led peaceful demonstrations and protests for good governance in India, Hong Kong, Chile, and Algeria, sparked global action for climate change, and steered community service, humanitarian response, civic engagement, and social media revolutions. We continue to demand and push for equality in a way that can revive the energy of everyone around us. We know the strength and the power that we hold. We have seen the impact that we can have. Right now, more so than ever before, the injustices that plague our world are highlighted by their symptoms. It's laid out on the table for everyone to see. The COVID-19 pandemic has stopped the world turning on its axis indefinitely. The systemic destruction of Black and brown people living in America has shoved the loudest voices into motion. And the overarching climate crisis continues to heat up and signal our impending doom. It is imperative that we act with speed and efficiency. It's critical that we make a move, and we make it right now. We need to commit to promoting gender equality in the classroom, the home, and the workplace. We need to draw attention to and validate intersectional identities throughout. Invest in the women in your lives and in your communities. Listen and learn. Improve wages, education, resources, access to technology, healthcare, and everything in between. We need to raise aspirations, place value on our work, encourage non-traditional vocations, and stop the violence that permeates our societies. Most importantly, we need to relish in the backlash that follows. The reality is that when women make our mark in previously male-dominated spaces, there is almost always a penalty. There is almost always rejection. That needs to be a sign that we are doing something right. We need to be aware of it, address it, and let it encourage us to keep going. To address the stakeholders, the officials, and even those sitting at home tuning in, you hold the power, you have the tools, and you know what needs to be done. I want to leave everybody with one final message. Invest in young women's leadership and meaningful participation in pressing global issues, from peace building, access to education, climate justice, to racial equality. Our time is right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Esther, for that very powerful call to action. We hear you, and we will base our actions on that very powerful message. So it is very clear. We have very strong policy instruments. There are 10 Security Council resolutions on women, peace, and security. There are 3 resolutions on youth, peace, and security. There's a Security Council resolution on COVID-19 and a UN comprehensive response to the pandemic. It is very clear. We don't have a shortage of laws and policies. The shortage is in the implementation. Now, what to do? This is not rocket science. We need to take these resolutions out of New York and bring them to life in local communities by working with young women leaders with support from governments and male gender equality allies. So on behalf of the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders and all our co-sponsors, I would like to thank every one of you for your enthusiastic participation, and I wish that we all stay safe and well. And we will leave you with a very another powerful message through video by the Youth Envoy, Jayatma Wikrayamanyake. So thank you all, and let's watch the video.
2020 is going to be a unique year in our history. It's been a difficult year with an unprecedented health crisis that took hundreds of thousands of lives of our fellow citizens. Yet, the way young people around the world are coming together to respond to this crisis stronger and more united than ever before makes me proud and hopeful. We will get through this crisis, and when we do, I'm sure that history will show that the world's young people helped bridge our world from fear to hope and from confusion to understanding. This International Youth Day, we celebrate youth engagement for global action. I celebrate you, young people who show resilience, strength, and solidarity in the face of an invisible enemy to benefit your communities. The COVID-19 pandemic revealed the fragility of our current global systems. It exposed the flaws of our political, economic, and social structures. I'm so proud to see young people calling out the root causes of these flawed systems. Every passing day, inequalities, racism, extremism, patriarchy, colonialism, unfair globalization, and irresponsible consumption and production are putting the lives of our people and our planet in harm's way. Our world needs saving, and you are the superheroes that will save us all this time. So let us take to the streets, organize our communities, organize our peers, lead by example, vote, run for office, and make sure that we become the change that we want to see in our world. Happy International Youth Day.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for your enthusiastic participation. Stay safe and well.